I think he froze. Yeah, it looks like he froze, but it's recording the call.
Okay, yeah, so it doesn't say that it started yet.
Oh, you're back on. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Scott, you ask a really good question. And that is that sensory input seems to be more vibrantly alive, that the colors are bolder. They may not be so distinct, but they're vivid, they're alive, that they reach. Now, this is something that is actually quite commonly stated for psilocybin and psychedelic drugs. Is this is one of the things that happens, and we talked a bit about that in the sense that we build up barriers when we're really little kids. I think that, in fact, one of the psychologists that I read said that it's actually a result of learning to stand up and walk like a human being stands up and walks, that all the other animals don't have to do. That a baby giraffe and a deer are ready to go. Domesticated animals like dogs, they when they're born, they're sleepy, sleepy-eyed especially. They don't open their eyes early, but they certainly know to go looking for tits. That in fact, within about 10 seconds of birth, those little puppies are scrambling around to get someplace. And humans, we lay on our back for months and months and months and months after we're born before we start to walk. And when we start to walk, we fall down. We're told to know. We're, we're supposed to stay out of things. And what happens with that is that a young child experiences a lot of pain because the body is vibrantly alive. And so what do? We shut down. We stop looking at what's going on sensually. And that's then supported greatly when we start going to school, is that now we start living in a conceptualized world. Instead of just seeing three apples on the table and don't have to count them, a dog knows the difference between two and three. I've seen them do that. In fact, there's shorts of where the dog is given a bowl, two bowls to choose from, and he chooses this one, and then they show that the other one has got more food in it, and the dog knows that. So dogs know how to count well enough. But it's intelligence, intellectualizing 1 plus 2 equals 3. And that's the world that we go into. We go into a conceptualized world. One of the habits that I had, and maybe that you can find this too, in fact, I still see this habit popping up from time to time, and that is the counting of things. How many of them are there? So if somebody is cutting bread, I'm going to be counting how many slices of bread they're cutting, not looking at the bread, looking at how many. I also remember one time going to Sunday school on Sunday night, and I was telling the Sunday school teacher that I was counting. And she says, "Counting what?" And I didn't have an answer for it. I was just counting. I think that that's part of the mathematical background that I had is that going after the numbers of things. All right. And so, uh, but that's intellectualizing. That's conceptualizing, and that we spend most of our time conceptualizing and not actually paying attention to the new sensory input that we have right now. That in fact, the sensory input that we're given right here, right now, presents us with paradise. That's all there is. It's just paradise, except that we filter it through our perceptions. And our perceptions are filtered in a way to avoid pain, to avoid intensity. And so, what happens with the psychedelics is that that kind of barrier is brought down. That filter system is disconnected, and we get back into the way of perceiving things the way that a young child does, where everything is bright and bushy and worthy of investigation and interesting, etc. As opposed to now when we go around the world, oh yeah, that's a tree, I've seen it 1,000 times, and I'm going to walk right past it without even giving it a hug.
Dirty old tree.
Dirty old tree. And so that's what happens is that it's not something new that happens when we go into these states that are brought about. Many times the person doesn't understand this when they first start taking psychedelics. And so when that intensity of reality hits them, it impresses them. And that's what you're saying, Scott, is that you're starting to take down these barriers. And as you do, things get vibrantly alive. The colors are more intense. The sounds are sweeter. The food tastes different. This is part of the reason why the monks spend so much time with eating. Most people can wolf down a McDonald's in 3 to 5 minutes. Easy peasy. Just. But the monks are taught and trained to eat very slowly, almost in a procedural way, so that when we're actually eating, which means chewing food that's in the mouth, that's all we're going to do. And in the sutras, it talks about withdrawing the hand from the bowl, as opposed to putting the bowl aside. They're two different things. That when you withdraw your hand from the bowl, you're not finished with it. You're just eating right now. And then setting the bowl aside means that you completely finished. And so those two procedures are distinct. But taking our hands out of the bowl, which in Western parlance would mean put the knife and fork down. Don't stir your food. I mean, think about it. And then next time that we're talking, look at what you do. Is that almost always while we are eating, we're piddling with the food that we're about to eat, deciding what's the next bite, cutting things, all of that. And we're not actually in the sensory awareness of what's going on in the mouth with the taste and the flavors. And that there's, some people are trained for that. An example of someone who knows what they're doing that's not actually a monk would be a wine taster or sometimes food tasters. Why? Because they actually pay close attention to what's in that food. Basically because they know that most of the people who are going to eat that food don't have a clue about what's in it because they're not paying attention. And there's more to it than just the taste. Also, there's the texture of the food and the distinction between what's juice and what's pulp. And the idea then is to separate them by putting the juices at the back of the throat and then swallowing them, while the stuff that still needs to be chewed then can stay around the teeth. And we use the tongue to push things around. And the Buddha actually talks about it in the sense that the next bite doesn't even get started until the last grain of rice. And so the last thing that we're doing is that we're checking the inside of the mouth. Is there any food left from this bite? And then we prepare, if you're in Sri Lanka, you ball it up in a little ball and pop it in with your hands. Thailand is kind of halfway in between. In fact, there's a three-way tie between, are you going to use utensils, chopsticks, or your fingers? Everything is allowed here. A lot of Westerners get upset. They go to the Wat and they see the monks just playing with their food, they think. Where in fact it's actually a procedure, and we're eating with our hands, getting the texture of the food, knowing the food, putting it in our mouth, and really experience it. Really enjoy what we're doing. And that can be done with the same intensity that is done with the sights, is to have that really intense experience of what something actually tastes like, because we're paying close attention to it. Can we, in fact, define the ingredients in it? What's the difference between a little piece of potato and a little piece of carrot and a little piece of meat? I mean, we already know those things. We've experienced it from time to time our whole lives. But now we're actually going to be paying close attention to it. And this is one of the ways of, this, by the way, some of this comes out of Sutta number 2 in the Majjhima Nikaya, especially this part about food. Mindfully, or with sati, with full awareness, we will eat this food, not for entertainment or the taste of it or for fattening or beautification, but only for the nourishment of the body. And yet
Now that
most
you
people,
mentioned that,
what?
now that you mentioned that about the food, it connects to a question I had about, let's say, body negativity that I perceived in some suttas. And there's a simile, I don't know, I think it's not the Majjhima Nikaya, but there's one in which they compare, the Buddha says that when you eat food, you should think of a family that's crossing a desert, and because they don't have what to eat, they must eat their baby. And that's what you should, that's a simile for when one is eating food. So from what you talk about, I don't perceive that sort of drasticness in the enjoyment of sensual pleasures.
I know that's kind of an interesting thing, and that when we hear that story, we intellectualize, and we intellectualize stuff into it that may have not been in the original sutta, like cannibalism is wrong. Okay, that's really, really drilled into our culture with a half a dozen examples that have happened over history, with airplanes falling into a snowbank, or the Donner crew who couldn't get across the pass, or cannibals in Papua New Guinea or something like that, and all of that. So we've got a lot of that stuff in it. But let's look at the fact, for instance, that the meal that you have right here and right now is really, really precious. It's going to keep you alive. And that something or someone, maybe your own child, had to give its life for you to continue yours. That the one thing that about humans is that almost everything that we consume and eat comes from an organic place. Even when we're drinking water, there's a whole lot of critters in there. That in fact, the only way to have water that doesn't have a lot of critters in there is by distilling the water. And what that means is you go kill all those critters and then you drink it. But it's the same point, is that we have to understand that every bite that we take has a cost to it from someplace. And that's the example then of the two people, husband and wife, having a baby crossing the desert. That if they don't eat that baby, then nobody's going to make it across that desert. No one's going to survive. And yet here we go with all of our shoulds and woulds and coulds and all of that kind of stuff, saying, all right, let them all die because you're not supposed to eat a baby. All right, but this is extreme example, and we in Buddhism we use extreme examples quite often. And the reason that we do use extreme examples, there's actually several reasons, and one of them is to keep the person from identifying with it in an ego way. An example of that is talking about, if we can, because sometimes we screw it up, in the sense of talking about satisfaction. And somebody will come by and say, well, I'm already satisfied. Well, okay, we're talking about a different kind of satisfaction. Or we start talking about victimhood and losers, and someone will come up and say, well, I'm not a loser. Okay. And with that same kind of intensity, and so it's almost better to use clear examples that are outrageous. Here's another example that's actually in the sutras. Practice like your hair is on fire. Have you ever heard of that one? Okay. In other words, let's put some intensity in it. Let's really get in there. Okay. What happens if your hair is on fire? You're going to put that thing out. If you wait, you'll be like I am. You need to put that fire out right now. The dukkha comes out right now. So this is what we mean by practice like your hair is on fire, or eat your food like it was your own infant that you were eating, so that you can really get in touch with it. That in fact, that's that you've heard me talk about death from time to time. And just now I can talk a bit about disposal of bodies. You know, we have 4 major ways of disposing of a human body, which happens to be the satipatthana. We can bury them in the ground, we can cremate them, we can bury them at sea, and then the air way of doing it is the Zoroastrians, that they'll build a really, really high temple and put the bodies up there for the carrion, the gulls, the vultures, the eagles and whatnot, the birds of the air that will eat it. Okay. And that's a very interesting point, but that's not the only way to go out. That in fact, I've got a plan. And that is that if you ever run across this dead body, drive it to the back door of the nearest Chinese restaurant. They'll give you $2 a pound. They'll make soup, wonton.
We should cut that out of the video. That's not on YouTube.
Okay, so that's the kind of intensity that we want to look at, in the sense of how do we practice the Dhamma. Because in fact, Scott, that's what you're actually talking about, is that you're actually using your eyes intensely. You're actually seeing those colors vibrantly, because you don't have that mask or that shield or those perception colored glasses that we put on, that has to do with the way things are supposed to be and should be and whatnot. Another way of thinking about it is that I'm sitting here looking out and seeing all of these trees and all these leaves in one respect. But in another way, I can say, wow, there are dozens, if not hundreds or maybe thousands of color of green. Even on one leaf, the way that the light hits it. And you can see the wind in the air, because the leaves are dancing. The trees are actually dancing. And as they dance, their colors slightly change because of the way that the eye sees. And so everything is just a really marvelous show if we'll pay attention to it. So Eric, you had a question.
No, I was just going to say that those extreme examples can also be applied in a certain way in real life. I heard a story yesterday that a guy lost his leg in a car accident, and he asked the doctors if he could keep it, and then he invited a lot of friends to the unique opportunity of eating human flesh. So he transformed that tragic event into like a fun experience. Like some people threw up and all, but you can like make light of things that are supposed to be tragic.
I didn't quite catch what he did with it, but my imagination is he
They
mounted
ate
on the
it.
wall like a fish.
No, they ate it.
They ate it.
Yeah.
All right.
Tacos.
That's probably a good idea to make light of it or to get some value out of it. The silver lining in the cloud. That at least I can invite everybody over for a free lunch. So this is the way of actually beginning to live our lives more intensely, simply because we're not putting so much time in that intermediate process of seeing, trying to figure it out, and presenting ourselves with a salayatana or an internal representation. And when we stop doing that and just see those colors, they become vibrantly alive. The world is actually in a dance. It's dancing. And that vibrancy is in the Hindus, when they talk about it, is lila. Okay? The cosmic dance. Everything is just swinging to its own tune. This is also a way of talking about cause and effect. And the dancing, one of the things about dancing is that like going around in a circle many times. I mean, you can stand there and spin like an ice skater, or you get around a whole temple and everybody is walking around the whole temple. But it has to do with circling. And that's certainly true in the sense of the Leela, because everything winds up being in a rhythm or in a circle or in a samsara. And that our job then is to stand back and stop focusing on one of the elements of the dance, and start looking back to see the whole dance. The thought right now is that there's two ways of looking at ballet. And that is, are you going to be watching the ballerina out in front in her tiny little tutu and all of her skinny legs and everything that's so delightful? Or are you going to watch the whole show? Because the whole show is actually what's being presented. And the women will more than likely just watch the whole show, but the guys will focus in on the ballerina, trying to get her in a certain pose to make it even more enticing. And you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. So the whole idea here is then to open our focus, to allow the whole troupe in.
Yeah.
Alex, you and I were talking about this a bit yesterday, the difference between samadhi and concentration. That if while we're looking at the ballerina, we're concentrating on her and we're missing most of the show.
Like whack-a-mole.
Like the whack-a-mole, exactly.
Or
And
for example, I know I can take, maybe we can look at like taking space as an object in the visual field. Just looking at space, we see the dance. We see a little rainbow dance. I look at my white door and I let my focus out and I see, oh, look at that. It's not white, it's colors. It collapses when I look at it and make it a door, but otherwise it's just a pretty show.
But if you look at the colors themselves, you can see the various textures, and I mean, how much complexity there really is in that door.
It's beautiful.
And what we try to do as humans is we try to simplify things so that we can bring them into focus for our understanding. And what we're doing with Anapanasati is that we're taking down that construction and start allowing things to be the way that they actually really are, because that's what we're paying attention to now, rather than paying attention to what we have perceived.
Yes, even because even these objects, when we concoct them, you know, if we take away, we make it unconcoctable. When we look at space, space is a concocted Dhamma. You know, we concoct space even. The space my body occupies or another object occupies. This is concoction.
Yes, that's an interesting word, concoction, and you're using it correctly here in the sense of perception. We concoct our reality. We perceive our reality rather than directly experience our reality. And Scott here is starting to actually experience reality directly, and he said, "Whoa!"
So pretty. So pretty.
Yeah, honestly, like I'm not on any psychedelics, but it is like certain experiences I had on psychedelics, like
It's
like
strange how they come together like that, isn't it?
yeah, but it's not the psychedelic though. It's like
Yeah.
it's not the psychedelic, it's the change in how you perceive or
Exactly, the
Yeah.
change in perception.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about. The
yeah,
whole
and
show.
yeah,
Dropping the story.
if you just like I remember being on a psychedelic and just looking at like a granite countertop or something, and I would just be like, "Oh my God, this is the most
Yeah.
interesting thing I've ever seen in my life." And
Yeah.
I would gaze at it and just be totally mystified and like enchanted by the granite countertop.
Yeah.
And but that
Okay.
that same granite countertop is there every day.
Right.
And I walk right
And,
by it.
and we don't pay attention to it because we're too
Yep.
concentrated on what
Mm.
the food products
Ooh.
that we're
Yeah.
putting on the
Yeah.
counter. Exactly.
Like the
And we're not.
ballerina instead of the show, huh?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly so. And the granite cop is part of the show. Now here's also something. Normally, when Coca-Cola is spilled on the floor, what do people do with it? They clean it up, right? We've got a rule here: no Coca-Cola puddles on the floor. But a 3-year-old can see that puddle of Coca-Cola, start watching it bubble, start watching it move around, and become quite curious about that uh, puddle of Coca-Cola. Or fast forward, and he's 35, and this is the first time he's used LSD, and he's got that same thing. He becomes fascinated by what is normally just a puddle that needs to be cleaned up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so we can actually be at that level. This is what happens with the drugs and the psychedelics, is that we kind of forget about all the constructed rules about what we're supposed to do, and just pay attention to what's real instead. And so this is the connection in between the practice of anapanasati versus taking drugs, because the
Yeah.
drugs wear off. I mean, you can take LSD every day, and only the first few times that it happens, or maybe occasionally after that, you can go into this state of openness.
It's
Yeah.
amazing how
And
rapidly
also
our
they have,
brain will readjust to a new normal.
Hmm.
yeah, and also um they have costs, they have benefits, but they also have potential risks. Like for example, um that effect can happen on the drug, but also if you're having unwholesome thoughts and you're going into an unwholesome thought train, the LSD is going to
Make it worse.
make it worse. Yeah, it's going to like accelerate it and spiral it down, and you might begin to believe. Well, it's funny though because it's the same thing that happens when you're completely sober. It's just
Yeah.
magnified.
Yeah.
So
You
the
just
same
don't know
way
how to
you
deal
can
with the same
into
loop.
your, yeah, the
Mm.
same delusions
Yeah.
that you have when you that you think are sane thoughts, like all the thoughts that you have about I, me, or mine, all the thoughts that you're mentally proliferating about the past and the future. You think
Yeah.
it's sane, but it's really delusion.
Right.
But then
It's just wild thoughts.
it just gets more delusional if you're don't know how to
Exactly
navigate.
so.
Yeah.
And yet we have we all of our the children, all of us make the same mistake, and we learn to make this mistake from our parents. And what is that? Is my thoughts have qualities.
Yeah.
My thoughts have qualities, and one of the most important quality of my thoughts is that they're mine. These are my thoughts. Okay. Another quality of it is that because these are my thoughts and I'm okay, that means that what I think is true. And so this is what happens is with our own thoughts, we get attached to our thoughts, think that they're true, And then we do not want to get any new information in that disagrees with what we already think and we already know. This is called confirmation bias, um, or it can be called a jiva denial, that we just simply deny what's going on because it interferes with our way of thinking. And not only that, but people who are who do that, who get attached to the way that they think, those people are the ones who are the most easily manipulatable. They're highly subject to propaganda. Why? Because the propaganda machines know what they already think, and so they intensify that. They intensify the racism, or they intensify the hate of immigrants, to where really nobody really, in their private way, really hates immigrants. Like the one who lives next door who brings a bottle of honey or gifts over, and he's okay. All right. But when you
Yeah.
have 30,000 Ukrainians show up in the small town in Germany, everybody in that German town sees immigrants.
Yeah. Me,
Right.
mine.
Right. Because they see that the immigrant is going to be taking something away from me and mine. And so that thought process. Now, in this situation that we're talking about, Scott, is that when this concept of me and mine and ownership and correctness and all of that fades away, we remove all of that perceptual system, then the colors that we see are no longer having a story behind them. They're just the colors. The shapes are just the shapes. The sights are just the sights. That's all they are. And the sounds are just merely the sounds, as opposed to passing them through our set of rules and through our set of filters and confirmation biases and all of that. Because that actually dumbs down, discolors, turns everything into black and white.
Mm.
And many people wind up living a black and white life, in the sense of this is good, this is bad, this is the way it should be done, this is the way that those people ought not do, and let's pass a law. Have you ever heard that phrase, there ought to be a law? And then somebody answers, there probably already is. I mean, people have been saying we ought to have a law against this, that, and the other thing. But the whole point about the law is that what defines a criminal is the law, not the action. So criminality is still a concept as opposed to a feeling. And so what we're going to be doing with our practice is to come out of the laws and coming out of the concepts and out of the ways that we should. In fact, what we're doing is we're taking that black and white filter off and letting things be in that vibrant, full color that they actually are. An example of that would be with food, is some food you don't like.
Hmm?
How many of you have a favorite food that you hate the most? How about liver, green peas,
Oh, I
cauliflower?
used to hate liver. I used to hate beans. I used to hate beans so much, and I found out I hate these beans so much. When I was a kid, I used to throw fits about food. I'd have only cheese tacos and shit, so my mom would pay attention to me. Everyone else would have regular ass tacos, but I'd be like, "Oh, well, my little brother, he's got bad legs, he's came out the box with some legs that were screwed up." And so I never wanted to actually say, "Hey, pay attention to me, mom," because I would be taken for my little brother. So what I found out instead is, hey, if I just throw fits about unreasonable ass shit, like I won't eat ground beef in my taco, guess what? I get paid attention to for 10 minutes or so. And so for the longest time, I wouldn't eat ground beef in a taco. And then I sat around long enough to figure my own bullshit out. Now I eat ground
or,
beef all day. It's okay.
or that's also something that happens quite often in meditation
Yeah.
retreats that people don't even know, is that they go in and they get strange food that they've never tasted before. But
Mhm.
because they're in the retreat and they've got these instructions about how they're supposed to
Mm.
eat their food, and they wind up tasting this stuff for the first time.
Yep. Yeah. Hmm.
That in fact, there's a story about that. The old story is that in the early days of the retreats at Wat Suan Mokkh, Mare Patoon was the chief cook. She had several young girls and whatnot to help her, but she knew a special shop that in Surat Thani that she could go and get tofu that had already been manufactured to where you could not tell the difference between McDonald's chicken McNuggets and this tofu. You just couldn't. It was that good a job of tofu. And she served that often, only to find complaints. Why are you serving us chicken nuggets? What does that mean? That means they weren't actually paying attention to that chicken McNugget. They just thought, they just conceptualized it. The fact is that tofu is not chicken, and you know that. And you can tell, you can take that apart, you can taste it, you can feel the texture of it and know that it's
Yeah.
not chicken, that it's tofu. But it's, in this regard, nice to fool Mother Nature
Yeah.
in the sense that it's better for us to have that kind of tofu rather than all those dead chicken bones in the yard.
Yeah. Very much so.
But
Yeah, it
this
used to
this
be
is
very much like you were saying about nourishment, food for nourishment. I used to look at food as only from the perspective of sensual desire, from wanting to taste this, from wanting to feel that, from wanting to have the bubbles pop in the mouth or whatever it is, and you can still do that. And sometimes it's still nice, like Pop Rocks. Mikey still likes them. But,
mm-hmm.
The
All
rest of
right.
it,
Well,
if I'm
guess
hungry, I
what?
eat.
That let us talk about then a box of donuts or maybe the bag of that candy. The
Yeah.
first one we do that with. The second and the third, in fact, the more of them we eat, the less attention we're paying to it.
Yes.
Why? Because we don't have that kind of focus of the mind to stay on this is what we're doing, we're eating. And so we
Yeah, then it
will
just becomes a
actually,
robot move.
and right, and so we wind up eating while we're talking, we're eating while we're playing with our food, we're eating while we're
Mhm.
thinking about what I'm going to do after I stop eating. Or if you're a kid, then you're eating thinking about what's on Johnny's plate rather than what's on my
Yeah.
plate. And so we wind up then conceptualizing ourselves right through the entire meal instead of actually paying attention to what we're eating. And so being in the here now, when we're eating, let's pay attention to what we're doing. If we're listening to someone talk, let's pay attention to what they're actually saying rather than trying to plan what I'm going to say next. I wish you'd shut up so I could talk. How many times has that happened in your life? You want to interrupt somebody, or you think that they're finished and they're not. And we want them to shut up so that I can talk. So become aware of that and recognize it all. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to talk. You can just sit and listen. Because that the listening is what's happening in reality right now. Going back to that business of the site, there is something else, and that is let's talk about artwork. From medieval and on back or even into popular. We have very famous artists like Picasso and Rembrandt, and there's a whole long list of them. And what people do when they go to that art is that they actually get into the art. I'm reluctant to use the word absorbed, but people will do with art just like that kid did with the Coca-Cola puddle. And we start looking at these brushstrokes. And in fact, it's quite amazing to watch artists on YouTube create things. And they start with a couple of threes, or they'll start with just these basic lines and then start filling in the detail. And it becomes quite a show to watch how art is actually done, how the colors are mixed together, and things like this. Or we can do it as the finished product of actually just looking at it like you're looking at that countertop or looking at that tree just living his life, swaying in the breeze, and just see how beautiful this is. What a marvelous existence we have. We actually do live in a paradise, and we're not paying attention because we don't like it. Why do we not like it? Because I told myself I didn't like it to get in some kind of power trip when I was a kid. I have one of those with French fries. And the story is that when my mom was pregnant with my younger sister, she got on the train. This is in the early 1950s now. Getting on a train to get from Oklahoma to North Carolina means that she had to go to Chicago and then I think to Philadelphia and then down south. So it was a long way around, and she was really packaged up for that trip. But when she left me with Daddy, the first thing he did was he goes and gets me comfort food, French fries. And those were the absolute best French fries I've ever had in my life. And every time I have French fries, I want these French fries to be like those French fries. And they never match up. They're never good enough. And especially yesterday's French fries are absolutely not good enough. But I'll eat them anyway in the hopes of that they'll be as good as the French fries I had when Mommy got on the train.
That's
And
how
so
I felt like with like after I broke up with my ex-girlfriend. I was like trying to replace her, but I'm like it's not the same. Like I'm talking about like in high school, like first love, you get your heart broken, and then you go run around trying to replace the first girl, but then you never quite get satisfied with the new ones.
Mm-hmm.
Grass is always
Exactly.
green.
Yes, we do that with so many things. But this is just one example of it. But when you recognize that, yeah, we ruin relationships because of a relationship we remember long ago. We destroy this meal because of what we remember from long ago. Okay? Then, in fact, if I don't like liver, then I should at least taste it without rejecting it out of hand and say I hate liver and don't touch it. It's better to actually start tasting it and see if I can find any value in the taste of the liver. Perhaps it has to do with the way that it's cooked.
Yeah.
Because
I mean,
sometimes
each creature's got its own liver, right? So maybe there's indistinct little differences. You never can. Maybe this liver is better than this liver. I mean, livers do a
yeah,
lot for us, you know?
right. Mm-hmm.
Livers do a lot.
But
All kinds of
somehow or
things
another,
affect
when
livers.
I don't remember exactly when it was that I had liver that so repelled me that I wouldn't ever eat it again. I mean, I don't even want to go into a restaurant when somebody's having liver.
Smell it.
Because I've already got a preconceived concept of this particular smell I don't like, as opposed to let me investigate that smell.
Yeah.
And so this is actually then the story of Adam and Eve. That here we are in our paradise and we destroy our paradise. Why do we destroy our paradise? Because of judging it. That we're in paradise and yet we go around saying this is good, this is evil, I like this, I like that, making rules, possibly posting up thou shalt not enter or whatever like this. And this is the story of Adam and Eve that's actually in the Bible, of eating of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. So
And
if
I
we
think
have,
it is especially telling that this is the one teaching given to us directly from God. The one thing that nature or God told us was don't do it. And we said, oh, I don't know about that. We think we get it though.
well, now he was, in a way, you could say, if you go by that story, Adam was set up. You know how he was set up? Because his job was to go around and name things.
Name.
Okay, if we go around naming things, then we're already caught in that perceptual trap the next little thing that we add beside the name is the label good or bad. It's got an asterisk or not. Okay, and so that judgment actually comes out of the naming, which is a mental way of owning it, which is a mental way of mentally constructing something. That the name is a mental construction. Instead of just leaving it the way that it is, to be seen, loved, interpreted, enjoyed, becoming at one with. Instead, we tell ourselves a story about it. And the first thing in that story is the name. We introduce this story with the name. Okay, so if we would stop naming things, then that means that we are cutting off that issue of making judgments and judging. One of the ways that I tell the story is that I've got a beautiful tree here. It's actually a sim tree, and the sim tree is actually a relative of the Bodhi tree. It's a ficus, a tropical tree, big, broad leaves, and the difference between the various ficus have to do with the way that the leaf is shaped. So that heart-shaped leaf is the leaf of the Bodhi tree. This one has more of a blade shape. But I've been thinking about tearing this tree out. I don't want it anymore because it's got yellow leaves. Yeah, in fact, I think there's 2, 3, I can count them. It's probably got a half a dozen or more yellow leaves. With all those hundreds of green leaves, it's got a dozen yellow leaves. I don't like yellow leaves. I want green leaves. So I'm going to rip this tree out. But then that palm tree over there has brown in it, and I'm really going to cut that one down. And the next thing I know, there's a banana tree got some brown in it. I'm going to whack that thing too, right? Here we
Whole
go.
garden's gone.
Just got the whole garden.
You can build
gone.
another
Whole
house.
garden's gone. Yeah, you can build another house. I know
We
our friend
just-
Scott has told us before, that the whole point of this life is to just stop becoming. And I
Mhm.
love that he told us that, reminded us of that. I think that's such a wonderful way to put it. To stop the
Yes.
becoming, to stop naming.
To stop naming, to stop becoming, to stop judging, to stop seeing the distinction between yellow and green leaves as if one is better than the other.
Yeah.
Because
Privileging experiences.
right, yellow leaves actually add value to the tree.
Yeah.
In a
They
way
let you
that
know
if
where all
it
the
didn't
green
have
is.
these, well, not only that, but if it doesn't have yellow leaves that fall down, then how are the new green leaves going to show up? I mean, the tree would die if it,
That's
Yeah.
that's the whole
Anicca.
point. That it
Anicca,
is part of the grand cycle.
impermanence.
Impermanence, that's right. Tender leaves, bigger leaves, yellow leaves, dead leaves, new leaves. It's just a cycle. And humans, we'll get one item on that cycle and then want things to be that way rather than recognizing that everything's in a cycle. And so we want one part of the cycle and it's not going to stay that way. This is a dance, It's not going to be a photograph. Life is not a photograph. It's a full-blown movie and things are moving. All is a dance. And so this is the whole question then that Scott was asking before is that when we come out of those filters, when we come out of liking one part of the cycle over the other, making the judgment that this is good, winter is good, and summer is good, but spring is wet and fall is nasty. That's the kind of mentality that we have. And in fact, every day is a nice day. And in fact, I really love it when it rains.
Mm.
Rather than rain, go away, come again another day. Have you ever heard that? That was what we
Yeah.
learned as a kid. And we are taught by those kind of poems to not like the rain.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of coming and singing and dancing in the rain. That in fact, the rain itself is nothing but a marvelous dance with its own music. And all we have to do is to pay attention to what's going on rather than paying attention to what we want. And just allow it to be the way that it is. And by doing so, we find up finding that it's actually okay the way it is. It's marvelous, in fact. This is a paradise. If we would stop judging it, it would go from dead neutral into, wow, oh my God, back into that, oh, this is good. And then we just relax into it. But there's that first, that wowness, and that wowness, we want to keep bringing it back. We want to allow that pity. We want to allow that immersion into reality that is so spectacular for us humans, especially when we haven't been doing it very much our whole lives, because we've been living in a conceptualized world rather than a real world. And so this is what we're practicing with Anapanasati, is getting ourselves safe, secure, comfortable, and relaxed so that we can be steady enough then to take in all of that flood of the nature, the sight, the sound, the textures, the body, the touch of the cloth, the wind, the breeze, the breathing. So much is happening while we're sitting and doing nothing.
Mm.
But if we're thinking about something, then we'll miss out on the reality of the moment. We'll miss out on paradise. We think we need a parking place, and so we'll pave our paradise, put up a parking. And now it's time to uh, just let. Here's the thing about pavement. There's places like that actually here on the island that they paved this one particular road years and years ago, and nobody uses it anymore, and now it's almost disappeared. But it was
Breaking up.
undermined because of the rain. You know, the rain would come and wash out under the road because we're in the mountains and whatnot like that. And so in this one section, nobody uses that road anymore. They don't use the whole road. Guess what? The mountain has reclaimed that road. It's almost in
Just eats
some
it up.
places hard to find where that road was.
Mhm.
Okay, paradise, in fact, will come and take over
Yeah.
your parking lot if you
Yeah,
let it happen.
I've been reading the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, and when Buddha lays down finally in the end there, Ananda tries to tell him, hey, let's go here, let's go there. It's so beautiful here, it's so beautiful there. And the Buddha tells him, hey man, this is the spot. This is where it was. There was a great empire right here. You can't see it right now, but I got you. I see it. It's a beautiful empire. It spanned all this time, all this space. This is
Mhm.
just fine for me.
That's right. This is actually the quality. This is in the Sutta number 22 in the simile of the snake, where the Buddha talks about um, when he's revered, that on that account there is no elation of the heart, and when he is reviled, on that account there is no dejection of the heart. And then he makes a very strange statement that I don't remember the exactly translation of the Pali, but the better translation that I've come up with, because I've been there and done that. I have been reviled in the past and I survived, and I have been revered in the past and I survived. There's nothing to it. And so reviling and revering is also the same thing as traveling, looking for some place to go, looking for love, basically in all the
Mhm.
wrong places, looking for the sights, to where in fact
Yeah.
the sights that we have right here is marvelous. We don't have to go to the Grand Coulee Dam or whatever like that. That we could just look at the mud puddle right in front of us. It's just as complicated and just as marvelous if we look at what's going on. That's the trick, is to have that attitude of been there, done that. That I often see references to India, either whether it's Modi or whether they're doing some tech or whether they're putting up solar or whether they're talking about the poverty still remains or the suits that they wear, anything that comes up about India. And always the thought comes up, been there, done that. Yeah, Scott, so you've been there, done that.
Yeah, no, that thing you said about not really caring if you're praised or blamed for something, that's really useful, like practically, and especially for my like the work that I do. There's all kinds of snakes in the grass and malicious gossip and politics and drama. And sometimes people are saying you're doing great, and then sometimes you get the hammer down, like all of a sudden you're terrible. So it's just up and down and up and down, but like it doesn't really matter. Like
Right. There's no reason for your the heart to go up and down just because the language is going up and down.
yeah.
That this is the unification of the mind, that on that account we don't have dejection or relation of the heart. We just allow things to be the way that they are. So if we take it, all this is me, then we make ourselves the target of those slings and arrows. But if we just have it in the Buddha's way, then it's like those compliments and those criticism just go right by. They were aimed at something, but the Buddha was not what they were aimed at, and so they missed him. And when you think about it from that perspective, then whenever somebody trash talks you, that's because of something in their mind, not in yours. And so you can just let that be, in the sense that it's not me. There's no reason for me. You know, it's like a wild stray bullet that goes off someplace and we pop up in order to get hit by it. That we actually find,
Exactly.
we actually go and find the trajectory of those insults so that they hit me directly.
Right.
As opposed to see, oh, there it goes in the air and it goes right by. That wasn't me at all. So, Nick, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining our call.
Hi, Nick.
Thanks for having me. Hey.
Well, does anybody have
I was
any
just gonna
follow-up?
say,
Yes, go ahead.
when you were talking about the Garden of Eden, and I find it always interesting that even as Adam's naming all the animals, so even when we're making, looking at the ballerina, looking at the full dance, it's not a problem until they eat the fruit of judgment, right? Like the fruit of good and evil. It's once you start assigning like this sort of like, oh, this part of the dance is bad and this part of the dance is good. This ballerina looks good. This ballerina looks bad. That's when things start falling apart. You can name as much as you want. You can figure out the yellow leaves from the green leaves because it's just neutral, right? You can still enjoy paradise up until that point.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And so the human mind looks for perfection. That even if this dance is being done by a troop of 5 or 6 4-year-old girls who are in dance class and they're not very good at it, what we see instead is not actually what these group of 4-year-olds are doing. We paint the the ballerina that we saw last year upon her and judge her and try to make her different to fit into what our concept of what a ballerina is. And so it's then the better thing to do is to let the 4-year-olds be the 4-year-olds that are doing the dance that they know how to do, recognizing that they will improve as they practice. But right now, this is the show. Let's enjoy the show that we've got now rather than planning on these girls getting good at what they're doing so I can enjoy their show later.
This is us stopping the concocting of perception. We can have sense contact, but if we guard the sense gates, pop, we stop the story right there. Just pop.
Right. We just
it's
stop
just
that
like
story.
that. It's just thusness. And then we can still look at it, and because even when I think about Dhammarato's description of his tree, like when I think of a yellow leaf, instantly in my mind, it's what leaf is yellow? Oh, the leaf that is not green is yellow, and then we start that comparison mind right there. And we let it go and go. And if we don't guard the sense gate, we can stop it at feeling Vedana. We can stop at Vedana. It's nice to stop at Vedana because then we can at least understand, maybe get insight, know that this is that, But then if we can go even further, we can stop the concocting to begin with. Then this is the end of selfishness. This is such a beautiful thing because then things just come and they go and we just get to sit and smile with them,
Just
and we don't even care if it's a
enjoy the
dance. It's
input.
just Yeah, it's just that. It's just that. Yeah, just input. Ooh.
Mhm. The thusness, the input,
Yeah.
the realization. We don't have to
Mhm.
make anything out of it.
Yeah. And like you were saying, we throw, whatever, whoever did it, threw something at the Buddha, insult, arrows. Devadatta threw a boulder, threw an elephant, you know. But the Buddha, he was one. He called himself he who has gone to thusness, you know. So like you were saying, it's in Devadatta's mind that the elephant's running at him anyways. It's in Devadatta's mind that the boulder is going towards him, because the Buddha is just part of the thusness. This is what happens when we go to thusness. We no longer, we can't be anyone's target. They
Mhm.
will always be frustrated because they still have they in their mind. They still have a yellow leaf. They still have a green leaf. Whereas we can just kind of hang out
Exactly.
with our friends.
Now that story that you're talking about with David Detta, the idea is that he actually captured that elephant. It didn't belong to him, and he
Right.
got the elephant drunk,
Good and drunk.
and then whacked him to come out of the side of the building that he was in into the road where the only person that was there was the Buddha. He was hoping that the elephant would trample the Buddha.
Mhm.
But the Buddha was wearing orange robes, which is the color of fire. And the elephant probably could see that and didn't attack him.
Yeah.
Okay, so the elephant himself, in his drunken state, was perceiving something that wasn't there. And
How
yet, most
beautiful.
of the Westerners, we want to make that a magical story.
Yeah.
Oh, the Buddha did
Go
woo,
stopped
woo,
with the
woo, woo,
compassion.
woo, and then the elephant didn't do what he was doing, you know. But it's not a matter of woo woo at
Yeah.
all. It's a matter of the reality of the situation.
Yeah.
And so that's a good story, actually, to end our conversation on, is that even elephants perceive things
Yeah.
ignorantly.
Oh.
But they may not have the chance. The dogs here don't have an opportunity to conceptualize and understand the Dhamma well enough to come
Right.
out of what their preconceived ways of doing things. But the dogs don't do a lot of preconception.
Right.
Most dogs live a lot of their lives right here in the here now.
Hmm.
But humans, we live in a constructed reality
Yeah.
because we remember things so well, and we like what we remember, and we think our thoughts are mine. Therefore, we're only going to look for the things that I believe is true, and we're going to ignore the things that I don't like or don't want to be seen true. Okay, and so that's where the propaganda machines come in with the news and say, "Oh, you watched our channel. I know what you're thinking. Therefore, we're going to
Yeah.
make you feel really bad about it."
And that's the blessing of being here in this human life and finding the teachings of the Buddha Dhamma. Yeah, is we get to bring training. You know, we get to train in sati. We have sati deliver wisdom to the point of sense contact. Whereas the doggy, he's always going to have Vedana drive him. And
Right.
maybe he doesn't get as much suffering, but we just make all those problems.
Oh, wow. That's right. The dogs have dukkha, but it's nothing compared to us
Yeah.
humans. We
Oh,
really know how to make that stuff up.
right. Chefs.
And so,
Yeah.
coming out of our concocting, coming out of our perceiving, coming out of our manufacturing a reality, and start living the reality that we actually are in, it's quite a paradise, you know.
Beautiful.
Okay. Well, thank you guys. Eric, it's been a joy to watch your little smile there. I've watched your smile go up and down and up and down. And thanks, Mick, for joining us. So, Laurent, do you have any final words? How about you, David?
Yeah,
I
just
noticed. Go ahead.
enjoying the dance,
Enjoy the
loving the
dance.
dance. Yeah, that's all.
Laurent, do you have any last words?
Yeah, I noticed also that when I stop filtering and tell myself let's try to see this moment as a new one, you know, because it really is like a new one. Everything is very vibrant and there is some pity, you know, very intense, and it only lasts like a few, like a second. But if I keep applying it, you know, with the sati and everything, I guess it's going to last longer. So it's
Right. You keep coming back and keep coming back. We perceptualize, we concept and theorize, and then we remember, oh, I'm in reality. Let's go look at reality. But then
Right.
we'll fall back into our perceptualized world
Yeah.
over and over again. We've got quite a habit.
Mhm.
And so in that regard, that's the old story of we've been talking ourselves into feeling bad our whole lives. Now it's time to actually start talking to ourselves about how nice things actually are until we actually see how nice and brilliant things actually are. That they're not the tragedy that we manufactured in childhood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very,
Okay.
very
Beautiful release.
Nick, I hope to see you again. Okay, anybody got any last words? Let's go ahead and finish. Everything's okay. Wow.
Yeah. Thank you, friends.
We'll see you guys.
See you
Excellent.
soon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bye,
Bye.
friends.
Bye-bye.